Just as a stranger, going into a home for the first time, will see, vividly, either beauties or incongruities, which constant association has dimmed in the eyes of the steady occupants, just so a fresh mind may be better able to visualize the more common processes, all too familiar to me, which I employ in my daily work. There are, in fact, many details in my routine which are no less important because they are common to me, and which may need some little explanation when described to others in different walks of life. I have, therefore, asked my associates, whose new viewpoints should enable them to observe these details in clear perspective, to present in this, the first volume, a survey of the working methods employed, so that the reader may, in the first few chapters, be brought to the point where he and I may go out into the fields together, and work among our plants with perfect understanding. Luther Burbank, Santa Rosa, California, January 7th, 1914. Armored against its enemies. The desert cactus shown in the accompanying direct color photograph print portrays a typical arrangement of armor, although many forms of cactus are more heavily spined even than this. In addition to the large bristling spines which fan out in every direction, there are hidden behind each rosette a bundle of undeveloped spines, numbering often as high as 10,000 to each eye. When the outward spines are cut off, these push their way forward with surprising rapidity to protect the gap in the armor. It is the acre-and-a-quarter patch of spineless cactus on Luther Burbank's experiment farm which first strikes the visitor's eye. In the same yard, there are 2,500 other experiments underway. New flowers, fruits, vegetables, trees, and plants of all descriptions, such as man has never before seen. But the velvet, slabbed cactus, freed from its thorns, seems more than a plant transformation. It seems a miracle. Since the spineless cactus represents the typical Burbank boldness of conception and reflects the typical Burbank skillful execution, we may as well begin with it. It occurred to Luther Burbank one day that every plant growing on the desert was either bitter or poisonous or spiny. It was this simple observation which gave him the idea of this new plant, a plant which already has shown its ability to outdo alfalfa 5-1, and which promises to support our cattle on what have been the waste places of the world, so that our ranges may be turned into gardens to produce the vegetable sustenance for a multiplying population. Let us look at the life story of the cactus as it unfolded itself to Luther Burbank when he realized the importance of the simple fact that desert plants are usually bitter, poisonous, or spiny. Here are plants, thought he, which have the hardiness to live and to thrive and to perpetuate themselves under conditions in which other plants would die in a day or a month. Here are plants which, although there may be not a drop of rain for a year, 2 years, or even 10, still contrive to get enough moisture out of the deep soil and out of the air to build up a structure which, by weight, is 92% water. Plants which contrive to absorb from the scorching desert and to protect from the withering sun enough moisture to make them nearly as juicy as watermelons. Every inch protected, not only in the form of cactus shown here, but in practically every form. The spines are so arranged as to protect every inch of the surface. It will be seen that it would scarcely be possible to touch a finger to the skin of the cactus plant above. So completely does the armor protect it. This form of cactus also gives us an interesting illustration of the fact that away Back in its history, the plant, instead of having flat slabs, had round stalks. In this picture, the 3 joints of the round stalk can be clearly seen. Here are plants which are veritable wells of water growing in a land where there are no springs or brooks, nor even clouds to encourage the hope of a cooling rain. Here are plants which are rich in nutrient for man and for beast. Here in the desert where the demand for food is the most acute and the supply of it the most scanty. And here they are, ruined for every useful purpose by the bitterness which makes them inedible, or the poison which sickens or kills, or the spiny armor which places their store of nutriment and moisture beyond reach. There must be some reason for that bitterness, that poison, those spines. What other reason could there be than that these are nature's provisions for self-defense? Here are the sagebrush, with a bitterness as irritant almost as the sting of a bee, the euphorbia as poisonous as a snake, the cactus as well armored as a porcupine, and for the same reason that bees have stings, that snakes have fangs, that porcupines have arrow-like spines, for self-protection from the stronger enemy which seeks to destroy. Self-preservation comes before self-sacrifice. Apparently, in plant life just as it does in human life, the plum tree in our orchards outdo each other in bearing fruit to please us. The geraniums in our dooryards compete to see which may give us the greatest delight. But may it not be because for generations we have fostered them and nurtured them and cared for them? May it not be because we have made it easy for them to live and to thrive? May it not be because we have relieved them of the responsibility of defense and reproduction, that they have rewarded our kindly care by fruiting and blooming, not for their own selfish ends, but for us? No man was ever kind to a cactus. No man ever cultivated the sagebrush. No man ever cherished the poisonous euphorbia. Is it, then, to be wondered at that the primal instinct of self-preservation has prevailed? That what might have been a food plant equal to the plum transformed itself into a wild porcupine among plants? That what might have been as useful to the horse as hay changed its nature and became bitter, woody, inedible? That what might have been a welcome friend to the weary desert traveler grew up instead into a poisonous enemy? If the bitterness, the poison, and the spines are means of self-defense, thought Mr. Burbank, then they must be means which have been acquired. The plants were here before there were animals to feed on or destroy them, so there must have been a time in their history when they had no need for such defense. It must be true, then, that away back in their ancestry there were desert sagebrushes which were not bitter, desert euphorbias which were not poisonous, and desert cactus plants which had not even the suspicion of a spine. It could only be the long-continued danger of destruction which could have produced so radical a means of defense. We have, then, but to take these plants back to a period in their history before defense had become a problem, in order to produce an edible sagebrush, a non-poisonous euphorbia, a spineless cactus. A relic of past ages. The color photograph print shown above is a 6-time enlargement of a cactus seedling, just after it has poked its head above ground. It will be noticed that the root has already shown its tendency to go deep in the ground, and that this, together with the spine-covered upright stalk or slab, reflects the characteristics of immediate ancestry. The more interesting fact, however, and the fact which proved to Mr. Burbank's mind his theory of the original spinelessness of cactus, is to be found in the 2 smooth leaves extending from the base of the small thorny slab. These leaves, though rudimentary and dropping off a few days after the cactus is above the ground, are reminders of a former age when all cactus plants had stalks or leaves that were as smooth as these. How in a dozen years Mr. Burbank carried the cactus back ages in its ancestry. How he proved beyond question, by planting 1,000 cactus seeds, that the spiny cactus descended from a smooth, slabbed line of forefathers. How he brought forth a new race, without the suspicion of a spine and with a velvet skin, and how he so re-established these old characteristics that the result was fixed and permanent. All of these things will be explained in due course, where the discoveries involved and the working methods employed may be made applicable as well to the improvement of other plants. It suffices here to say that, beginning with his simple observation and reading the history of the cactus from its present-day appearance, he was able to see outlined before him the method by which a plant yielding rich food and forage has been produced, which, more than any other plant, promises to solve the present-day problem of higher living costs. But Mr. Burbank asked a visitor at the Santa Rosa experiment farm, "Do you mean that the cactus foresaw the coming of an enemy which was to destroy it? Is it believable that a plant, like a nation expecting war, could armor itself in advance of the necessity? And if the cactus did not know that an enemy was later to destroy it, would it not have been destroyed by the enemy before it had the opportunity of preparing a means of defense?" Let us look into the history of the plant as it revealed itself to Mr. Burbank, and see the answer to these questions. The likelihood is that parts of Nevada, Arizona, Utah, and northern Mexico were once a great inland sea. That the deserts now there were the bed of that sea before it began its long process of leakage or evaporation. In these regions, so far as is known, the North American cactus seems to have originated. Back in the ages before the evaporation of the inland sea was complete, the heat and the moisture and the chemical constituents of the sandy soil combined to give many plants an opportunity to thrive. Among these was the cactus, which was an entirely different plant in appearance from the cactus of today, no doubt, with well-defined stalks and a multitude of leaves, each as broad as a man's head. As the heat which had lifted away the inland sea began to parch its bottom, the cactus, with the same tendency that is shown by every other plant and every other living thing, began to adapt itself to the changing conditions. It gradually dropped its leaves in order to prevent too rapid transpiration of the precious life-supporting moisture. It sent its roots deeper and deeper into the damp substratum which the sun had not yet reached. It thickened its stalks into broad slabs. It lowered its main source of life and sustenance far beneath the surface of the ground and found it possible, thus, to persist and to prosper. Perhaps there were, in the making of the desert, other plants not so adaptable as the cactus, plants which perished and of which man has no knowledge or record. And so, we may assume the cactus and those other plants which adapted themselves to the new conditions crowded out those which were unable to fit themselves to survive, and covered the drying plains with their verdure. But there came animals to the bed of this one-time sea, attracted perhaps by the cactus and its contemporaries, which offered them food of satisfying flavor and easy access. Of the plants which had survived the evaporation of the sea and the heat of the broiling sun, there were many, quite likely, which failed to survive the new danger, the onslaught of the animals. Species by species, the vegetation of the desert was thinned out by the elements and by the animals, and the animals, with plant life to feed on, multiplied themselves in ever-increasing hordes, till perhaps the cactus was but one of a dozen plants to survive. In the days when the cactus slab was a round stalk, the cactus still bears leaves. In the days when the cactus slab was a round stalk and before the animals had begun their work of devastation, the plant had leaves as other plants. That this is so is evidenced by the fact that cactus slabs even now put forth these leaves in rudimentary form, the evidence of an old instinct which has not been entirely obliterated. Shortly after the tiny leaves come out, as shown in this color photograph print, they fall away to be followed by the spines which push out behind them. The likelihood is that the original leaves of the cactus were as large as a man's head. Then came the fight of the cactus to outdo the beasts which sought to devour it, the fight as a family, and the fight within the family to see which of its individuals should be found fit to persist. Of 1,000,000 cactus plants eaten to the ground by ravenously hungry antelopes, we will say, antelopes which had increased in numbers year by year while their food supply year by year was relentlessly dwindling. Of these 1,000,000 plants, not down to the roots, perhaps but 1,000 or 2 had the stamina to throw out new leaves and to try over again. But just as in its previous experience, the cactus had changed the character of its stalk, so now it undertook another change, the acquisition of an armor. This armor at first consisted of nothing but a soft protuberance, a modified fruit, bud, or leaf perhaps, ineffectual in warding off the onslaughts of the hungry animals. So of the 1,000 or 2 left out of the 1,000,000, there may have been but 100 which were able to ward off destruction. The 100 stronger than the rest, though eaten to the ground, were still able to send up new leaves. And with each new crop the hairs became stiffer and longer, the protuberances harder and more pointed, until finally, if there were even only one surviving representative of the race, there was developed a cactus which was effectually armored against its enemy, against its every animal enemy. The 100, stronger than the rest, though eaten to the ground, were able still to send up new leaves, and with each new crop the hairs became stiffer and longer, the protuberances harder and more pointed, until finally, if there were even only one surviving representative of the race, there was developed a cactus which was effectually armored against its every animal enemy.